Okay, this video is going to serve as a review of how to do the different elements of a sorting assignment I gave to my class. I'm aware of the fact that Python has the ability to sort using a call of sort, but the lesson was more about using nested loops and building lists and so forth. So we're going to ignore the fact that there's that function, and we're going to move forward. So the goal of the assignment was to take numbers that the end user inputs, or the person using the program, and sort them in ascending order. Extra credit will be given for utilizing a heap sort instead of a normal sort. So I break this down into a couple chunks. You know, like I tell my students, you got to break it down to different pieces and accomplish each piece and build upon it. So the first thing we need to do is we got to take input and add it to a list of integers. The next thing we're going to need to do is establish a way to exit a loop that is asking for the input. So there's got to be a way to have a loop and then stop the loop when the user is done giving numbers. And then we're going to work on the third step, which would be to actually sort the numbers. So the first step is to take in input and add it to the list of integers. This is accomplished using the append statement. In order to use an append, we have to have a list. And so we're going to establish a empty list by saying num equals, and then two brackets with nothing in between. It's just our way of saying we're going to make a list. We just don't have anything to put in it yet. So what you would do is you would put dot append after the list name. So in our case, num dot append, and then what goes into in between our parentheses here is what actually is going to get appended to the list. So let's send that off to the side for a second, and let's talk about what we're going to use to get the input. And like we learned a couple weeks ago, you use an input statement. So we're saying that you would put to the screen the prompt, enter a number, and store the value that the person enters afterwards into whatever variable you set up here. I just call it var for a generic variable. So then we would stick that between our two commands here, because we have to establish the list first. And then we're taking in our input, and then what we would do is take this variable and insert it into the parentheses after append. And that would allow us to add something to the end of our list. You could also take out the step of getting the input into a variable, and you could just put the input inside the parentheses. So instead of 3 lines, you have 2 lines. So instead of having to type out, enter your information, put it into the variable, and then put the variable into the append statement, you can combine them all into one statement like that. So to make this useful, the idea of a list is multiple variables, so it'd be kind of foolish just to have one variable that we're appending. So let's go ahead and put it in a loop and print it out to see how this works. So let's go to our shell, or our program, and type it in. And so we typed in what I put in my last slide, and then we run it. And so I'm going to enter several numbers up to 5, and then it's going to print out all the numbers 1 through 5. So we made a string of 1 through 5. And so thus we are done with taking an input and adding it to a list. We've made a list of integers from the input that the end user gave us. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to establish a way to exit the loop that is asking for input. There's 2 ways to do this, with a while loop or with a for loop. I haven't taught you how to use the while loop yet, so you'll probably use the for loop. We'll go over the while loop here in a second. So we'll look at the for loop first. So as we've established before, your loop goes for the variable. It represents whatever number is each time through, then in a range from some number to another number. Well, in order to use this loop in our program, we first need to go ahead and get information from the user as to how many numbers they're going to put in. So you would accomplish that by asking them how many numbers and storing that into variable. And then we're going to put that input into our range. But before we do that, you have to make sure that we're pulling in a variable we can use. As we went through in the very beginning, when you ask for input from the user, the computer stores it as a string. And a string will not work as a range. It's like saying, go through this loop, 0 through red. You don't know what red means. There's no value to red. So we have to make sure that we make our input into an integer, and that's accomplished by putting int and then parentheses around whatever. That will change anything into a integer. So now we can go ahead and put our variable into our range. Our range will obviously start with 0, and then it will go into variable. So it will repeat until it gets to the value that they entered. So let's go ahead and put a print statement in there to see if it does execute our statement as many times as we ask it to. And we'll skip over to our program. We'll put the code in, and we'll run it. And it says how many, and I will type in 5, and it print hello world 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our loop worked. It took in 5 and repeated our loop 5 times. So the other way we can do this is with a while loop, which we haven't really covered in class yet. So that's why it's not the one I would expect you to go with, but it's the one that I like better personally. While loop just does the statements in its indentation, like anything else in Python. Whatever's indented underneath a loop or a if-then statement, that's what's executed if the if-then statement is true or how many times the loop goes. So while this loop is going, anything indented under it is going to be executed constantly until we hit a criteria that we set to break it. So let me show you how this works. So in this case, we're going to make our input statement, once again, var, for just a generic variable. And we're going to ask them to enter 0 to exit the loop. We're going to take that input, turn it into an integer, and put it in var. And then our criteria, which we've set right here, is entering, having the variable equal 0, is what we'll put here. So we're saying if the variable is equal, and double equal signs for the statement of is something equal. If we use a single equal sign, what we're doing is changing the value. We're assigning a value. So if var is equal to 0, then break. So what this does is it will repeat this line until var is equal to 0. At that point, it will break out of its loop. So let's give it a shot and see what happens. We've got our code typed in, and we run it. And the first time I enter 2, and that's not a 0, so we keep going. 7, it's not a 0, so we keep going. 3, it's not a 0, so we keep going. And then the last time I put in 0, and the loop stopped. So now that's our while loop is working. Our while, until we enter a 0, our loop will keep going. So now we've done the first step of making a list. We've done the second step of finding a way out of a loop when we're ready to get out of the loop. And the last step is the actual sorting of the list. So let's start off with something pretty basic, and we're going to say for x in range 0 to 4, which means do this loop 4 times, print x. So we run that, and we get 0, 1, 2, 3. So we ran it 4 times. The first time x was 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. So let's look at this a little closer. So the first time we went through the loop, x is equal to 0, so it printed 0. Second time we went through the loop, x was 1, so we printed 1. The third time it was 2, so we printed 2. And the fourth time it went through, it was the value was 3, so we printed 3. So what if we went a little further in here and we built inside of each loop? This is the crux of what this assignment is about. It's nested loops. So we're going to build another loop inside of our X loop. So as we can see here, everything that's indented underneath the for loop, so far just the print, is covered by X, value X. That's a loop. But if we build another loop below it, and we're going to call it our Y loop, it is inside the X loop. The X loop is on the outside, the Y loop is on the inside, therefore the term nested inside. So then let's go ahead and throw in a print statement there at the very end, and that means both of our loops, the print statement is inside. So the X loop encompasses both the Y loop and the print statement. So what's going to happen is every time I do a number for X, I'm going to do Y inside of it all the way through, right? So I'll show you how this works. So we're going to print every time that we go through the Y loop. So at X is 0 in this big box here, the big purple box, that's X is 0, and then each one of these is a Y incrementing up. So at X is 0 and Y is 0, we will print X and then 2 carets, just something I threw in there to represent comparing. That's not an actual thing we use to compare, but I just typed it in there. And let's substitute in the value of X, which is 0 for this entire purple box. And then we'll substitute the value of Y in, which is 1 for this green box right here. Then we go look at the second box. X is still 0 because we're still in the big purple box. But now we move to the 1 for the Y. And so forth and so on. So everything inside the first purple box, X is 0, and then we go through we'll go through the whole range of Y, 0, 1, 2, 3. So then we go out to the bigger view. When we get down to X equal 1, we say X is 1, but we've reset Y. We started Y over again, so Y goes back to 0. And now we go through all the 1s, and so now we have 1 for X, and then all the Y's inside. So Y runs a total of 4 times inside X. Every time X goes up, and then runs through all the Y's, and so forth. So let's go ahead and put this into our code and see what it looks like. So we'll erase what we typed in already, and we'll type in the for X in range 0, 4, for Y in range 0, 4, and then print X and Y. And then we run it. And then we're going to, after we run it, we're going to go ahead and stop here because it's a good stopping spot. And I'm getting close to my maximum 15 minutes. So I will see you for video number 2.